Hey, future lawyer. Welcome to the LSAT Simplified podcast presented by Hey Future Lawyer, where we talk about all things LSAT, law school admissions, and otherwise. If you want to check out our free LSAT course, go to heyfuturelawyer.com to sign up for a free account today. Hey, everyone. Happy October 6th, I believe. So today we got a fun one. To start with, the big topic for today's episode is the formal logic way of doing the LSAT versus the intuitive way. I very much so believe the LSAT is a test of comprehension and that you can do it in a way that makes sense. So I fall down on the intuitive way, but we're going to make sense of why that is, how I come to that position, and then honestly, why people really like the formal way of doing the test. I am perplexed by it, to put it mildly, that this is the go-to way of doing the LSAT. I find it to make the test way more complicated than it is. I also find that people have an odd Stockholm syndrome reaction to it, where they fall in love with it despite the objective difficulty that, well, I guess it's not objective. I would argue subjective difficulty that it introduces into the test. You could do a study to prove it's objective, and I think you probably could, to show that people that do it that way score worse on average. But we'll say subjective, since I have not done that. I'll also touch on some emails as well as some Reddit posts that we have if we have time. But I did largely want to spend time on the main topic, which is the intuitive way of doing the LSAT versus the formal logic way. So with that, part of this was I was on the phone with my health insurance company, which I know some of you are like, Ben, why are you talking about that? But anyway, occasionally when I'm doing something that while I'm waiting for it to finish, I will pop on Reddit real quick and like respond to a comment or something. I basically spend no time on Reddit because it's a giant waste of time. There's a ton of bad resources, and it's also pretty easy to get in fights on Reddit, even when you're not trying to, which is not a good use of energy. But when I have literally nothing to do, I will occasionally pop on there. And I was waiting on hold with their awful piano music playing. So I was like, why not pop on Reddit, see what's going on? And I can drop some wisdom to the LSAT community, which basically always backfires. I will note people on Reddit are just the most miserable people. They are incredibly socially, I'd say, negative, where everything is responded to as an attack on character. You're all going to see what I mean by that in just a moment. But anyways, that's the backstory. So I saw a comment, or not a comment, a whole post on Reddit about logical rules. And honestly, the post was pretty rough. It's the very logic-y way of doing the test. I'll just read a few points from it so that you all can get the basic idea. So with it, and the post is not what I take issue with. I mean, the post is this formal logic way of doing the LSAT, which I disagree with, but the overall comment is more what I got into. So anyway, the post is called, if you want to find it, the cheat sheet for every LSAT conditional logic rule. I always find this perplexing. I teach conditional logic in about 20 minutes just because it is honestly that simple. Most issues with conditional logic have to do with the complication of it, because I find when you actually talk about conditional logic in the way the LSAT uses it, people understand it intuitively because you guys have IQs above room temperature. The ways they break conditional logic on the LSAT are honestly confusing sufficient for necessary or confusing necessary for sufficient. And just to give you two examples of that, to confuse sufficient for necessary would be to say, if you get shot in the heart, you will die. Ben's grandfather is dead, therefore Ben's grandfather was shot in the heart. That is confusing something that is sufficient, which is being shot in the heart, with something that is necessary for the outcome, which is death. Is it possible that my grandfather died in any other possible way? The answer is yes. He could have died of cancer. He could have fallen off a cliff. He could have gotten stabbed in the heart. So that's confusing sufficient or necessary, and people should intuitively understand that. If you are reading critically, which is the intuitive way, and actually thinking through what you're going through, pausing, digesting, it's pretty obvious that the conclusion that Ben's grandfather got shot in the heart makes no sense, because it's like, well, Ben's grandfather could have died all sorts of ways. So that's one way they break it. The other way is the opposite, which is confusing necessary for sufficient. An example of that is that to have life, you must have water. Mercury has water on it, therefore Mercury has life on it. And that is a necessary condition, not a sufficient condition, because the obvious objection, once again, if you have an IQ above room temperature, is what if there's something else for life? What if it's not just water? What if you also need the proper temperature? What if you need a food source? What if you need, I don't know, the touch of God to start off the chain of life? I have no idea. But the point is that water is not good enough. It is one ingredient. It's not the whole thing. You could also do it in a recipe. Like, to have cake, you must have eggs. I have eggs, therefore I have cake. And the answer is like, no, you don't, because what about sugar? What about flour? There's all these other ingredients. So I find that, and like, holy shit, I just saved you 10 hours, depending on the LSAT prep you go to, for free, because it's just not that hard. This is a test of dense reading. And the issue is that these are not difficult to see when you're thinking it through. It's just that you all typically don't think it through because you go way too fast to understand. And if you slow down and actually see what the ideas are, you're like, yeah, that makes total sense. In fact, I teach this every day. And ironically, I'm teaching it tonight in class, because today's the second meeting of our October group, and I always go over necessary sufficient on the second day. And Everyone gets it. Like I have not ever had some words like I that does not compute. Now, occasionally we'll get caught up in the LSAT questions because the LSAT questions get wordy. They have a lot of intense vocab and it gets hard. But as far as the actual idea that Ben's grandfather didn't die due to getting shot in the heart, he could have died in other ways. Everyone's like, yeah, no shit. Like, of course he could have died in other ways. That makes sense. Like it's in like I'm not stupid. What do you think I am, a dummy? And the answer is no, I don't think you're a dummy, which is why I don't think that the sufficient necessary conditional logic is what gets you all. And it's why I don't think you need all these like magic spells or incantations to translate this into other terms, because if you understand the rules for what they say in English, you understand the logic. It's not deeper than that, although it will be made out to be by a lot of LSAT prep. So that's what I mean by the intuitive versus formal way. So anyways, to read this post, I wasn't here to dunk on the post. We'll just read it for context. So like we said, it's the cheat sheet for every LSAT conditional logic rule. And let's read it. Conditional logic on the LSAT has a reputation for being brutal. Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's not an earned reputation. It's false. It's actually not brutal. But sure, it does have that reputation, whether or not it's true. They continue. Many students see it as the hardest part of the test. Yeah, I mean, they do, but that's because they're wrong. Full of tricky translations, logical traps, and fallacies to track. Yeah, I mean, once again, this is true. People do view it that way. Whether or not that is actually the case is a separate question. But sure, people do think conditional logic is hard. And for what's worth, if you're listening and you think conditional logic is hard, please, for the love of God, ditch your prep and come talk to us. It is insane that people will spend so much time spinning their wheels with prep that just doesn't make sense. And for what's worth, like we have a lot of free shit. So you can see how we do it for free before. Like, is this self-interested? Absolutely. But it's also self-interested for you. I want you guys to crush the test. If you think conditional logic is hard, that means your prep sucks because it's not hard. There are hard parts of the LSAT, but if they're telling you the easy parts are hard, then they're distracting you from the work that needs to be done. The work that needs to be done for your LSAT score to get better is you need to be an elite reader who is incredibly precise. That is not conditional logic. That is being detail oriented. And the conditional logic is easy when you understand the issues you all don't understand. And so then you get to it and you're like, oh, I fucked up the conditional logic. And the answer is no, you didn't read well. You don't understand. You're not thinking through it very properly. But that's not because you don't understand rule negation 7Q, which for what's worth doesn't exist. I'm just giving an example of how absurd this all sounds to me. It's because you missed what they were saying and you weren't reading critically. Your vocab needs work. Your sentence understanding needs work. And that's hard because like that is a difficult thing to battle. And it's a lot easier to convince yourself that I just don't understand this logical translation trick, but that's not reality. You don't understand, or it's not that you don't understand logical translation tricks, it's that you don't understand reading translation. You cannot turn the words on the page into ideas in your head. Because if you could, you would understand that the logic is really simple. Anyway, let's continue. They continue. The good news is that once you start spotting the recurring patterns, the difficulty drops fast. That is true. If you can spot the patterns in conditional reasoning, it does get a lot easier. But that takes it from like medium easy to super easy. It's not that it goes from hard to easy, which is the implication of this claim, but rather it goes from like being pretty easy to being super easy. So anyway, there's nothing terribly offensive in this post so far. They continue. My goal here is to highlight the most essential concepts in LSAT logic, which is fine. I mean, I would argue it's misplaced because I imagine they probably will highlight actual concepts. The issue is that these concepts are unneeded. You don't actually need to know these things to do well at the LSAT if you just read and understand. So this is my issue with a lot of LSAT prep on conditionals and logic stuff. It's not that it's not real. It's all technically real. Like none of this doesn't exist. But the reality is that you don't need to know if you're good at the underlying skills. So people will often be trying to use this as a band-aid for a gaping wound where what they need is surgery. And the surgery is fixing their actual reading and comprehension. But instead of trying to band-aid it with like, oh, here's a logic trick. It's like, dog, you don't need logic tricks. You need to actually understand what you read, which I guess is like, the reason it's hard to sell, and we'll get into this, is that this actually does require hard work to actually understand. The good news is that it actually works as opposed to this, which doesn't work. Because if you're a bad reader and you slap on logical band-aid, it still doesn't work. You still don't understand what you're reading. So it's not like this is the shortcut way and Ben's advocating the hard way. I would argue this appears to be the shortcut way, but fundamentally it's a dead end if you go down the logic way, if you have not patched up your underlying reasoning skills. Anyway, let's continue. Once these pieces click into place, you'll find conditional questions and logical reasoning become much clearer and faster to work through. Yeah, I'd argue that's not necessarily true. In fact, I think the example that we go through will disprove your claim. But anyway, so they have a few conditional statement foundations, which is that conditional all statements concept. This refers to an if-then statement, which establishes a 100% guaranteed relationship. If the first part, the if part, is true, then the second part, the then part, must also be true. This is often signaled by words like all, every, any, or if then, which is true. That is a sufficient condition. Now, if you understood what the word all means, you wouldn't need to translate it into a statement because you would just understand the sentence. If they tell you that all sheep are mammals, do you need to understand that's a sufficient condition to understand what it's telling you? If you have a sheep, what kind of animal is it? Is that a bird? Is that a reptile? Or is it a mammal? I don't know. Do you know? Like, I almost feel like I'm on Dora the Explorer asking like a 5th grade level question, because it is a 5th grade level question. It's fucking obvious. The sheep is a mammal. Even if I called it the Booba Luba, and I just to like make this abstract, but let's say the Booba Luba is orange It's like, well, then if I have a boobalooba, what color is it? And you would go, it's orange. It's like, yeah, no shit, because like, duh. So anyway, this is my issue with this stuff is it's not that it's not real, it's that it's treating you guys like you're idiots. And I don't think you guys are idiots. I think that you all are on different levels of intelligence. Some people are smart, some are not. But no matter where you are, your issue is not that you can't understand the sheep is a mammal. Your issue is that you can't understand what they do with it and the complex ideas they then go, not complex ideas, but the complex way of phrasing that and the little shift they do on you. So anyway, they continue. They recommend diagramming that as if A, then B, which would be if sheep, then mammal. So like if we were diagramming, it would be if sheep, then M, or if S, then M. But my objection there would be, well, that's redundant because like, are you stupid? Like what? You don't need to do that. So anyways, that's a sufficient condition. And then they say the contrapositive. For every conditional statement A to B, there is a 100% logically equivalent statement called the contrapositive. You create it by flipping the terms and negating both. So the contrapositive of A to B is if not B, then not A. So if you're a sheep and you're a mammal, it would be if you're not a mammal, you're not a sheep. To which I go, yeah, no shit. If something's a reptile, it's not a sheep. And you could argue like, well, Ben, we intuitively know what a sheep is. But even if you say my Uba Luba example, like the Uba Luba, which is an orange, if you say if it's not orange, then it's not an Uba Luba. You don't have to understand what these things are to understand the logic behind it because it's really fucking simple. Like this is not hard. And I don't understand why the LSAT world has made, well, I do understand why. We'll get into that. But I mean, the short answer is it comes from logic games. It also comes from the fact that people react very negatively to being told that they can't do logic, as we will get a case study of. I mean, it's actually really funny because I'll tell this people talking about actual questions. I'll be like, oh, here's what you're missing. It's really obvious. And people never respond positively to that. They actually will respond quite negatively. Because for some reason, I think people want the LSAT to be harder than it is, which is always perplexed. Well, people respond in two ways. Some people respond very positively. We're like, oh my God, that's great. This is so much easier. Others, for some reason, respond very negatively. And they're like, I want it to be hard. It's like, why the fuck do you want it to be hard? I just told you how it makes sense in plain English. And yet people will, for whatever reason, cling onto their mistaken understanding that this test is harder than it is. And I don't know why that is, but I mean, I have hypotheses, but anyway. So that's a contrapositive. It's like obviously quite straightforward, but let's continue. Then they say translation indicator words. You also want to be aware of the alternate wordings that imply these conditional relationships. Sufficient indicators, if, when, all, every. And I hate the framing of that because that's not an indicator. That's just what those words mean. The words are not indicating shit. That's just what their definition is. So I hate that we're looking for like indications of what things mean as opposed to actually just understanding the words on the page. And this is why I really dislike the idea of formal logic is that it's like, oh, it's like, here's how you're going to translate it into ideas. It's like, well, if you're a competent reader, if you are functionally literate, you just do that naturally. And by telling people that they need to understand these logical tricks, you're giving them an out and you're saying you don't actually need to understand. You just need to use these tricks. You need to recognize that every is a sufficient indicator, sufficient condition indicator, which is technically true. It does technically indicate a sufficient condition, but you wouldn't have to know that if you knew what the word every means, which I would hope that you do, because it's a fourth grade, third grade, second grade, we'll say kindergarten level word. These are not intense vocab words. If, like, come on, people, read better. And it's one of those things where, I don't know, people have resistance to this for some reason, but it's making the test harder than it needs to be. Anyway, so they say these words introduce the trigger. Whenever they modify, goes on the left side of the arrow. Yeah, but that presumes that you need to diagram it, which you just don't. But we'll kind of skip on because we get through the point. They then get into quantifiers, which is like most, some, many, few. And these are technically words that you should understand. However, they're also words that you should understand as a human on planet Earth speaking English. Because what does most mean? It means over half. What does some mean? It means some, like more than one. I think technically means at least one, logically speaking, but I don't know that there's ever been an LSAT question that plays on some equaling one. It's typically equals two or more. And for what's worth, I think logically, if you go to the definition of sum, actually, let's just look up the definition of sum. Instead of like looking at logic terms, let's just go to Merriam-Webster. So the word sum, Oxford is what gets pulled up, is an unspecified amount or number of. And an unspecified amount could be one. So technically, it could be one. Now, amount doesn't mean that has to be positive. It can't be zero because sum cannot be zero, but it could be one technically. And here, I didn't get to that via the logic of it. I just went to the definition, and the definition told me what it means because on the LSAT, they use English definitions. It's a reading test, guys. It is a literacy test. It is not a logic test. The logic is easy. If you find the logic hard, you are going to get fucking killed as a lawyer because conceptually, you're not going to be able to keep up. This stuff is not hard. Physics is hard. Like biology is hard. The LSAT logic is straightforward. And I know it doesn't feel the way. I'm not saying the LSAT is easy. The LSAT is hard, but not because the concepts are difficult, because the wording is difficult, because they will give it to you in ways that fry your brain. It's like, what did I just read? And that is what they're testing. They're testing people that can get through the what did I just read. They're not testing do those ideas make sense? Because once you translate it to the ideas, what you'll find is that the answers actually all make perfect sense pretty easily. It's that people get lost on the translation. That's where the LSAT gets people. And it's why I hate the teaching of the LSAT as formal logic, because it's not. That's not what they're testing. Anyway, I got kind of digressed in this, or not digressed, that's the wrong word. Diverted into this post, which I didn't even mean to go into, because it's not, I mean, nothing he's saying is wrong, the guy who posted this. So this is not meant to be an attack on him at all. And if he comes by it honestly, this is very standard LSAT dogma that people repeat. I don't repeat it, but that's because I'm, special and whatnot. Also, note, I'm not special. If you're another LSAT person, company, tutor listening to this, please do it my way. I don't own my way. My way just makes sense. I don't understand why you guys all insist on doing it in a way that makes no fucking sense. But, well, it's not that it makes no sense. That's incredibly overcome. Maybe it's because it sells more tutoring. If you tell someone I have to teach you 40 hours of LSAT nonsense, because I'll be quite honest, I don't do much LSAT tutoring because I honestly don't push it. Like, I will do it. If you want an LSAT tutor, you can email me and I will name my price depending on how busy I am. However, I'm not advocating you get tutoring, and I think that might be why people think the LSAT. Well, we'll get into the whole speculation for why the LSAT does it in such a nonsense way later down the road. But for now, so they go through quantifier words like most, many, few, blah blah blah. Then they get into valid argument forms like modus ponens, which I have no fucking clue what that means. But what it means is given A and B, given A leads to B, and given A, you can conclude B. Yeah, fucking duh. Like, let's go back to our sheep as a mammal example. We know all sheep are mammals. We have a sheep. What do we know? Well, we know it's a mammal. Did you need to know that's modus ponens to understand what the fuck that meant? The answer is no, you didn't, unless you are actually stupid. Because that makes sense. Like, duh. And I don't think, and this is where, like, once again, and I'm probably beating a dead horse here. So you guys are probably just listening for funsies at this point, not because you're actually, well, I mean, this is valuable because for what's worth, if you do it the wrong way, you should, like, hopefully I'm going to convert some of you into doing it the way that makes sense. For your own good, not for my good. Like, obviously, yes, if more people do it my way, better for me as a company, but honestly, better for you because you're actually going to get a high score. Fundamentally, is that not what you care about? Is that not the goal that should be your North Star of LSAT prep? You would think it would be. Anyway, so do you need to understand that it's modus tonens to know that if we have a sheep, it's a mammal? I don't know. I don't think you need the Latin there. And the contrapositive of that is given A and B and not B, you can conclude not A. So that means it's given our sheep as a mammal example, knowing that it's not a mammal means it's not a sheep. Yeah, no shit. Like, I mean, well, I don't know if it was a bad one for profanity, but is that not obvious? Does anyone not get that? Like, seriously, like, send me an email if you're like that, Ben, that does not compute. And I will delicately send you some blue collar jobs in your area because you are not going to work with your brain if you cannot. I mean, I don't mean to sound like a dick here, but also, well, and I know I do based on our very bimodal podcast reviews because we have people that love this and we have people that do not love this. And honestly, that's okay. I think just the way I talk, I'm naturally going to off-put some percentage of people. But for those of you that resonate with it, like, am I being elitist here? Or is that reasonable to understand that if it's not, like, given the fact that if you're a sheep, you're a mammal, if we know it's not a mammal, is it that crazy to know it's not a sheep? Would your 5-year-old cousin be able to understand this? Maybe not. But would your 8-year-old be able to? I hope so. Otherwise, they're going to be going to a special class in that sounded bad. I don't mean specialists and like special needs, but also like I kind of wonder if an 8-year-old couldn't understand that, maybe that would be grounds for sending them to special education. Anyways, this is like where I get in trouble because I say these things very hyperbolically, but I don't even know that that's hyperbolic. If you have an 8-year-old who can't understand, like talk me through it with them. We have a sheep. All sheeps are mammals. This is not a mammal. What does that tell us? What kind of animal is it? Or do we know anything about that animal? And maybe they wouldn't ask. Maybe you'd have to prod it to them and be like, well, is it a sheep? And hopefully they would go, no, it can't be a sheep because a sheep has to be a mammal. And we know it's not a mammal. So maybe an 8-year-old wouldn't get this. Maybe I'm overestimating how smart 8-year-olds are. But you guys are not 8-year-olds. And the point that 8-year-olds might be expected to understand this means that you guys definitely should be able to understand this. So anyway, like, is all of this technically true? Is modus ponens technically true? Is modus tollens technically true? Sure, it's technically true. Is this useful for the task in front of us, which is getting high LSAT scores? The answer is fuck no. This is not what you guys struggle with. And if it is, there ain't no way you're getting through the reading because the reading's so much harder than this part. Okay, so blah, blah, blah. They continue going on for a while. They do all these translators, all these rules. None of this is necessary. In fact, I don't understand a lot of what they're talking about. Like, they have like illegal negation. fallacy of the inverse. I have no clue what that means. The good news is that if I saw it in front of me, I would recognize it because I'm a good reader. So I would just be like, yeah, you can't do that. I wouldn't call it an illegal negation fallacy either. I'd just be like, that makes no sense. What are you talking about? Like, that's a stupid conclusion. Based on your premises, your conclusion does not follow, which is why I recommend not memorizing these flaws, but rather just learning to be a good reader, because being a good reader applies to all things as opposed to treating the LSAT like it's a knowledge-based test, which it's not. It's a skills-based test, and you can get good at the skills. It's honestly easier. Like, I don't understand why people do it this way. It's so perplexing to me. So anyways, they posted that, and one person commented, and for what's worth, I wasn't going to comment because obviously I disagree with this, but I also choose my battles, and I'm not going to be a dick for the sake of being a dick. And further, I don't even view it as being a dick. I mean, people really respond negatively to this. I'll read my comment verbatim so that you all can analyze, like, do you think I was over the line? I don't think I was. And for what's worth, the person who responded didn't respond overly negatively, but you'll see. Anyway, so one person said, and for what's worth, they did end with a PS. Like, if you want help with this, actually, let's read their PS. PS, feeling overwhelmed by all the rules for unless, quantifiers, and compound statements? I know I am. I help students turn that complexity into a clear, repeatable system. We'll find the root of your confusion and build the one rule you need to provide clarity. Will that one rule be understand the words on the page? Because I can tell you that for free. Read better. If this confused you, good for you. It confused me too. I didn't know what this guy was talking about what for it's worth, I can't remember the last time I missed an LSAT question that I like really tried on. Like occasionally I'll like take a half look at one and I'll miss it, but that's hyperbole. I miss one in class from time to time, maybe one or two a month, but out of like the 200 to 300 I do. So anyway, yeah, I mean, you don't have to understand this to be really good at the LSAT. This is just nonsense. It's not real. But anyway, they do say you can book a 15-minute free consultation at their website. And honestly, like, whatever. I think they come by this honestly. This person is not trying to scam anyone. I don't believe that's the case at all. I think they're teaching the LSAT in a bad way, but it's also common. Like, I'm the oddball. I'm the weird black sheep on the outside of the LSAT teacher club who doesn't think this test is so hard. I mean, for what's worth, I should rephrase. It's not hard because of the logic. It is hard because of the reading. And for whatever reason, everyone teaches it like a logic test. But anyway. So one person commented, great cheat sheet. For some more practice regarding the concept of negating some advanced structures, I'd actually recommend PT 152, section 1, question 25. As to arrive at the correct answer, you need to pull out some, quote, deep cut, in italics, advanced conditional logic deduction to even be remotely aware of the correct answer choice. One of my least favorite questions of all time, but good practice. So when I saw that, and when I saw them say very explicitly that you need to pull out some deep cut, advanced conditional logic deduction, I'm like, well, I am incapable of doing that. I don't know how to do deep cut, advanced conditional logic or deduction because I don't do it that way. So I was going to see if I could answer it. So while I was on the phone with Blue Cross Blue Shield, I'm like, well, let's just pull this question up, take a look-see at it, and see if I can figure it out. And the answer is, yeah, I figured it out pretty easily. It wasn't that hard. In fact, it was actually a pretty straightforward one. I will note what's straightforward for me will obviously not always be straightforward for LSAT preppers because I'm an LSAT professional and this test makes sense to me. But the point was that they made a pretty strong claim, which is that it is necessary to understand deep conditional logic and deduction to come at, or as they put it, be remotely aware of the correct answer choice. And I was able to disprove that because I was like, well, no, I mean, I just did it. I don't even know how to do a contrapositive. Yeah, I figured this one out pretty easily. So anyway, I commented, I disagree with the idea that deep cut logic is necessary here. I still F up contrapositives and found this one quite easy. The flaw is just that Stallworth could be wrong. Our conclusion claims Henning is the liar, which ignores that Stallworth could be the liar. I don't mean to come down harshly, but the overly heavy-handed logic way of doing the LSAT is absolutely not the only way, and I would argue this Q, as in question, is actually quite easy when the issue is spotted in plain English. The wrong answer choices are quite off. So due to licensing restrictions, I can't actually talk about the actual LSAT question on the air, but I did write a parallel argument for myself to read, so I'll just read this parallel argument for you all so you can kind of follow along. You can also pull up the actual question should you want, which is prep test 151, section 1, question 25. But my parallel argument is Rivera claims she turned in her portion of the group project on time. And immediately what you should go is, okay, she says so, but what if Rivera is a dirty liar? What if Rivera is the rich kid in your like poli-sci group project who doesn't do her work, who just like says like, yeah, I totally submitted it to the professor. And then you talk to the professor and they're like, no, they didn't, they lied to you. So okay, maybe Rivera did, maybe Rivera didn't. They continue. If both Rivera and Chen had submitted their parts on time, the supervisor would have approved the project. All right, so we have a condition. If they both submitted it on time, we would have approved the project. The supervisor did not approve the project. Okay, so someone fucked up. Therefore, Chen must be lying about submitting his portion on time. And the obvious objection here, and I will say obvious because it is obvious, is, well, what if Rivera didn't submit it on time? You are, and by you, I mean our argument, it's very explicitly saying, hey, Chen is the liar, but at no point have we said that Rivera is not a liar. We just say Rivera claims to have submitted their part. But does that mean Rivera actually submitted their part? And the answer is no, it doesn't mean that. because Rivera could be a dirty liar here. And that is the same argument that we had. It was different, obviously, but it's like, did you need deep cut conditional logic to understand that? The answer is no. No, you didn't, because it was pretty straightforward. And then to write a similar answer choice, I mean, I wrote one, but we won't go through it because it's actually kind of redundant to write another one. But the whole point is that if you just catch that we have two possibilities, two people are claiming something, and then we overly assume that one of them is lying, it's obvious that the other person could be the liar. It's like, well, maybe person A is the liar. You claimed it was person B. What about person A? What do you think? Couldn't they have been wrong? And that's the issue there. And the right answer was pretty on the money. I mean, I wish I could go through this question on air. I just can't. So anyway, I would, but I can't. So I would pull it up, and if you want to look at it and send me an email, you're welcome to. But I can't go through it on the airs, so I won't. Anyway, that's the issue there. So that was my comment. Just go back. My whole point was like, hey, the flaw is just that one person could be wrong. Our conclusion claims one is the liar, which ignores that the other person could be the liar. That's what I said. And let's see what they respond. They say difficulty from person to person is subjective, so good for you. So already starting off a little patronizing, I would say. Good for you. Like, yeah, it is honestly easier for me as an LSAT professional. I would expect it to be easier. I do worry that this person misinterpreted my point. I really wasn't pointing out that like this test is so easy. I mean, for those of you that listen, I think you'll know that I don't think the test is easy, or at least that's not the impression I mean to give. I think it's easier than it's taught, but it is still objectively a really hard task in that most people struggle with it for a long time. Anyway, my whole point was that you don't need this formal, heavy-handed logic way of doing it. But they continue. That said, this is rated by most as a 5-star difficulty question, which, yeah, sure. I mean, I'm not saying it's the easiest question. I said that it's quite easy. I guess the subtext there is I think all the LSAT is easy when you do it the right way. And I think I mean, well, ironically, they're reading something out of my claim that they didn't say, because like I could respond to them, which I didn't. I focused more on the point, but I could also hit on that and say, well, wait a sec. I'm saying the whole LSAT is easy, which is something that I would generally stand by. It is tricky because like it is easy/hard, but when done properly, the LSAT should feel easy. It should not feel like you're pulling teeth. It should be like, yeah, these answers actually do make sense. Anyway, they continue. The correct answer choice does not mirror the intuitive diagram for the stimulus. I'm like, well, yeah, that was your problem. You were diagramming it instead of just reading it to understand. I didn't diagram it. And you might be wrong. Maybe the correct answer choice doesn't mirror the intuitive diagram, but you could have dodged that if you hadn't diagrammed, you just understood what the flaw was, which was pretty obvious. They continue, which is what makes the question difficult. So ironically, this person's even conceding that diagram made this question more difficult. I don't know that they realized that, but they did do that. And this isn't meant to be like a dunk. I'm not trying to dunk on this person's logic. This is really meant to serve the point of the LSAT is a reading test, not a logic test. Anyway, they continue. It's easier to spot the flaw in the stimulus than the correct answer choice. Yeah, I would argue against that. I thought I mean, once again, I can't go into the actual answer just due to the nature of, can I substitute words maybe? Let me pull it up. Maybe I can substitute words to like do the correct answer. Because I mean, it was a little different, but it got to the same point. I'm just going to pull it up and see if I can like come up with different words to use. Yeah, so it says, according to X, something happened here. So that was one group. But if the accident occurred here, so-and-so could not have witnessed it. Thus, X was mistaken in its claim that so-and-so witnessed it. And the obvious objection there is, well, what if the person who claims they witnessed it is a liar? I mean, it's the same exact issue, which is, and for us, where this is hard to do without being able to actually talk through the answer, because I'm like trying not to use the words too much because we're really not supposed to. But the right answer is making the same mistake, which is that we're assuming that the news report is right when then the person could be the wrong person in the wrong. And that might not make sense without pulling it up. So if you want to, prep test 151, section 125. But the point is, it's the exact same flaw, which is that one person could be wrong, and we're overly assuming that it's the other person. We have people, person A and B, each of which could be incorrect, and we overly assume that one of them is incorrect, and we don't know that. So anyway, I thought it was pretty obvious, but they continue. You can get to the correct answer choice by process of elimination, which is actually not what I did. I did not process of eliminate this, but whatever. But seeing the parallel between the correct answer choice is difficult if you don't have an intuitive grasp on advanced conditional logic and equivalent translations. I mean, I guess you could argue that I have an intuitive grasp on those things, but that's because I read well. I mean, was that a hard argument? Just to go back to the argument here, folks. The argument was, and this is my analogous argument, this isn't the actual one because like talked about, I can't talk about the actual one. It's that Rivera claims she turned in her portion of the group project on time. If both Rivera and Chen had submitted their parts on time, the supervisor would have approved the project. The supervisor did not approve the project, therefore Chen must be lying about submitting his portion on time. What's the obvious objection? What if Rivera is a liar? Is that deep cut? I mean, I don't know. Is that advanced conditional logic? I mean, maybe you could argue it is, but I disagree with that premise. I don't think that is advanced conditional logic. I think that's straightforward. I think a smart 8th grader would understand that pretty straightforwardly. Anyway, They continue. And even at that, under time conditions, it's very possible that all answers look unattractive. Sure, yeah, if you don't understand what you're looking for, all the answers do look unattractive. That's why the LSAT's hard. When you don't understand, it is hard. But the solution there is not advanced logic, it is understanding. They continue, approaches and opinions vary, and I shared mine with a thumbs up emoji, which is kind of a way of trying to end the conversation, in my opinion, without actually addressing my argument. To which I did post a follow up. I mean, I always try to keep it on target, like on argument, which is frustrating because there were some jabs in this person's comment, which is pretty typical on Reddit. People tend to get pretty, I wouldn't say personal, because this person didn't get overly aggressive, but there are some things in there that where I'd said harsher. Like they said, so good for you. It's like, well, that's not really addressing the context of my argument. Further, they really address on the point of whether or not this is easy or hard, whereas my point was that their approach was making it harder than need be. So it is kind of frustrating. But anyway, so I responded, I'll clarify since I don't think I was understood, which isn't trying to be a dick. I think you can interpret that as being rude because it's like, well, I'm having to like repeat myself, but I am having to repeat myself because their comment kind of did not engage with my point. They continue. I wasn't saying the question's easy, just that it doesn't require diagramming or formal logic to understand it perfectly. I actually think relying on diagramming creates artificial difficulty in spots like this. The reasoning flaw here, which is that maybe so-and-so is lying, is straightforward when you read it in plain English. No advanced symbolic translation needed. So my comment wasn't to say, oh, this one is so easy, because I don't believe it is, but rather to point out that intense logical rules are not at all necessary when you can read closely, which is, in fact, what they said. They did say that you did need that to be even remotely aware of the correct answer choice. Because I wasn't claiming that, this is the easiest question ever. I was claiming like, oh, you made a very strong claim there, which is that you need these rules to understand the correct answer choice. And the reality is, no, you do not. You do not need to know these rules to understand the answer choice. If you just read and understand, it makes sense. So anyway, kind of a long point, and I have like 7 things to go through, and that was just point 2. So let's keep chatting. So yeah, like we talked about, that's the logic way. The logic way is kind of reliant upon the if-then reflex. Like anytime they see if or a conditional, people start diagramming. They translate sentences into symbols. If A, then B. If not B, then not A, which is treating the test like a system of formulas to decode instead of ideas to understand. And I think this is attractive because it feels rigorous and intellectual. It makes people feel smarter than they are. It feels like you're making progress. Which, I mean, technically you are. Technically you are learning these things. I'm not to say that you aren't not learning when you're studying these things, but the issue is, are these the things that will resolve your score problems? Because the reality is, if you're bad at the LSAT, it's almost never that you aren't good at these rules, because these things tend to make sense when talked through. It's that you are not that good of a reader. Because, and for what's worth, I don't think you can be a good reader and be bad at these skills. Because by becoming a good reader, you have to understand what things mean. And to understand what things mean, you don't need the logical rules. So what's funny is the people that need to focus on the reading the most are the ones that are most enticed by these rules because they think it's like the shortcut, when in reality it's like, man, it's not that you're not good at these logic LSAT tricks, it's that you aren't a good reader and you need to learn to read at a higher level because we have a literacy crisis. I also think a lot of this comes from logic games, which for those of you that don't know, logic games was an old section of the test, which has now been gone for almost 18 months, which is sad. I was a big logic games lover, but it's gone. And logic games had a lot of very explicit rules, like if X is third, then Y is seventh, or if Q comes before P, then P and S are adjacent, stuff like that. And because they were so mechanical and clear, people liked to diagram them. Now, I still was not as much of a fan of diagramming, but I did diagram logic games. Partly, I mean, and for what's worth, the diagramming in logic games versus diagramming and logical reasoning, these are like 2 different things that we're talking about. One of them is creating like a visual Sudoku. The other is putting words into symbols. And I would argue that you really couldn't do logic games without diagramming, whereas in LR, you don't need it. But I think because people got used to diagramming in logic games, it was pretty normal for it to carry over into logical reasoning. So I truly believe if the LSAT were released today in a counter universe, people would not diagram it because the impetus would not be so clear. And the way of doing it my way, in an intuitive way, would just be so superior that no one would ever do it the other way. But because logic games was around for decades, it became ingrained and diagramming became part of the LSAT zeitgeist. And then even when the impetus for diagramming was removed, which was the logic games diagramming remained because people got used to doing it that way. They got used to putting conditional statements in this thing. And conditional statements just aren't that hard, like we've talked about. So anyways, I think diagramming is more of a leftover effect than actually usable. I mean, not to say it's not usable, but there's no use for it. It's not needed at all. Like nothing that diagramming gives you cannot be done with just better understanding. And I would argue better understanding is a more direct way to the end goal, which is, actually understanding the task and getting the questions right. So in contrast, we have the intuitive way, which, I mean, you can call intuitive. I would just call it reading the task, which is reading for meaning, not translation. So when you're reading sentences, ask like, what are they saying? What do we think about it? With our Rivera and Chen thing, my response was, what if Rivera is a dirty liar? What if she's a dirty sorority girl who doesn't do her projects? Shout out to that girl sophomore year when everything went on COVID and just stopped responding to my texts I had a group project for those of you that can't tell. It's actually very frustrating. Lauren, actually, I remember her name now. So shout out to Lauren from PSI. What class was it? 204. Anyway, the whole point is, what if she's just a liar? Just like Lauren. I mean, she didn't lie to me. She just ghosted me in terms of our group projects. Anyway, that was our response to the Rivera Chen argument, which is that maybe Rivera didn't turn it in and she's just blaming it on Chen. Anyway, and we have our whole active reading at Hey Future Lawyer, which is what did they say? What do you think? Where are they going with this? You could also argue that's reading comprehension. Now, our three questions, trademark, I'm kidding, for those of you that can't tell, is that it's just understanding. And a lot of people don't read to understand, which is where the three questions become useful because it forces people to go through the understanding, but it's not necessary. Anyway, like if you wanted like what's Ben's LSAT philosophy, it's read to understand and then review questions. That's where we come in. Our LSAT prep, and for what's worth, the way we make money off LSAT prep is we give you guys explanations. So if you're struggling with the LSAT, you can come see what makes sense and what doesn't through our explanation. So instead of fighting through it on your own, you just get it. And then further, you get the software, which just gives you questions. You don't need to like worry about doing it. You can do it on our testing interface. We have Rewind Review, which is really cool. If you haven't tried it out, even if you're studying elsewhere, you should do Rewind Review. Basically, what it does is it takes the questions you got wrong and it mixes in a few questions you got right. So you have to review earnestly, but you can't just change your answers willy-nilly. A lot of sites will do this thing called blind review. I mean, this is not all of blind review, but it's incredibly time wasting in that you have to go through the whole test. Or alternatively, they have suggested blind review, which just gives you the questions you got wrong. But that's also silly because then you can just change your answers willy-nilly. We kind of have, I'd say, the best of both worlds, which is that it gives you 8 questions, which are largely ones you got wrong, but it will mix in a couple you got right. So you can't just change your answers willy-nilly. You have to think about, did I actually understand this one or did I not understand it? So if you're changing your answer, you're doing it for a reason. Anyway, we call that Rewind Review. It's a feature that I think is really cool, and you all can access it on Prep Test 123 for free. I mean, if you pay us, you get access to literally all the questions. But anyway, if you just want to like play with it for yourself, we do have one prep test for freezies. Anyway, so that's intuitive. Further, we use logic, obviously, but not because the logic is hard, but just because if you understand the words, it's a consequence of comprehension, which is really our difference. Like we prioritize clarity and precision. We keep things in English. If I can't explain an LSAT question at like a 10th grade level or a 5th grade level in terms of spoken English, I worry that it's just not understood. And part of this gets to, I don't think a lot of people in the LSAT industry actually understand the LSAT like they think they do. Like when I explain things, I'm just like, oh, it's obviously this. And it feels very simple, but that's because it should be simple. If it's not simple, it's not clear. And so anyways, people I think will talk about it like, oh, there's like this nested conditional claim, whatever. It's like, do you even understand what you're saying? Or are you just saying that to like sound smart? Because I don't know what they're saying, and I understand all these questions. Like they make sense to me. When I look at them, I'm like, I see why A is right conclusively. I see why these answers are wrong conclusively, and I can explain it back to you. So when I hear someone talking in a way that I can't understand, part of me wonders, am I missing something or are they missing something? And they're using big vocabulary and things to hide it. Because that's another thing is I'm always a fan of small vocabulary. I have big words that slip in, but I intend not to because I find that often when people use bigger words to communicate ideas, it's because they are not confident in the ideas underlying the words. So instead they try to confuse people. And some people are tricked by that. Now, we're not for everyone. And honestly, I think we're here for smart people, which it always sounds bad every time I say this, but that is genuinely our target audience is we want smart people because honestly, you guys are better to work with. And I think anyway, I won't go down that route because we have a lot to get through and I just like keep going down rabbit holes. All right, so where were we? So yeah, why do people think formal logic is necessary? I mean, for one, it's LSAT dogma. That is what most LSAT teaches. People are trained to diagram every conditionals. Like I talked about, I think that comes from logic games. It is understandable where it comes from. I think that ultimately you have to evaluate if this is worthwhile or not. And I just gave you a very, I'd say, strong pitch for why you shouldn't do it. But people do come by it honestly. People also think that parallel reasoning means match symbolic structure instead of match reasoning. Parallels are matching reasoning, they're not matching symbols. But people often will think like, oh, parallel reasoning equals like A and then B. And like technically that can work, but the whole structure of the LSAT is on reasoning. It's not, like, you don't need to understand the symbols. People also do often mistake symbolic translation for genuine understanding. Now, I will note this can backfire. One great example of this is sufficient assumption questions. Often there's an adjective or an adverb on a condition in a sufficient assumption question. And should you miss that adjective or adverb, you miss the point of the question and you miss what's broken. But if you're diagramming, people often leave the adjectives or adverbs out until they'll make a diagram that looks valid. But the reason they missed it is because they completely dropped an adjective or adverb, which is modifying the subject or the verb. Anyway, it's funny because, like, to me, these questions are so easy, and often someone will submit it to me, and they're like, "This doesn't make sense." Well, actually, that's a really easy question. You just drop the adjective in your diagram, and if you were reading to understand, you wouldn't need the adjective, or you wouldn't need the diagram. Anyway, that probably doesn't make sense to you that like haven't done way too much LSAT, but it's funny because like people will think it's so much harder than it is. Anyways, The LSAT hardest questions are really not hard because of logic. They're hard because of the reading of the test. And yeah, anyway. Well, the other thing that I think is really interesting to touch on is people do often get really defensive when I say the LSAT is a reading test. Like we talked about, that person got somewhat defensive. I won't say they got overly defensive because I don't think they did. But I have had people that have gotten pretty defensive, and I get downvoted pretty aggressively whenever I post this on Reddit. Like I talked about, the only time I go on Reddit is when I'm on the phone, basically, or when I'm waiting for like something to finish processing. Like occasionally when I'm waiting for the podcast to finish processing because it's an iMovie, I will pop over to Reddit just because it takes like 5 minutes. I'll leave a comment or two. But anyway, I have ran into this most times. Whenever I say to someone, like, I'll go to help with the question, and I think genuinely point out what they're missing. And people, instead of being like, oh my God, that's so much easier, they're like, fuck you. And I'm like, that's an odd response, but okay. Anyways, I think where it comes from is I think high scores here it as like kind of devaluing their achievement. Like they're like, I spent all this time mastering contrapositives. And so then to hear that it's actually just reading and it's really simple feels like an affront to one of their identity points, which is that I'm good at this. Because in reality, it's not that they're good at it, it's that it's pretty easy. And if they've spent all this time mastering it, they're like, I don't know, people identify with stuff, which is unfortunate that people let their identities get so caught up into the things they do. But it is true. It's actually why I think people tend to dislike me generally, is because I will just say things about ideas, but people often conflate that with their identity. And it's why I think people have such negative reactions towards me in general. Because for those of you that don't know, I actually get a lot of hate. Like I'm not popular in the world of LSAT. People don't like me, which is, I'd say hard, because I as a person strive with, or I struggle with being disliked. Fortunately, I have a shield against that, which is that I have such, I'd say, strong convictions on the things I believe in. Partly because I think I'm OCD, that I'm just unwilling to compromise things. Like, for example, I'll often talk about various bad plans to study for the LSAT and, apply to law school. And this does not win me friends. When I say don't apply to law school if you're still studying for this fall, as in like don't apply this fall to attend next fall, people hate that shit. It is not popular. It does not win me money. I constantly get attacked for saying that to fearmonger and gain money, and it is not true. Because I'm not saying start now or it'll be too late. I'm saying it's already too late. Like the game's kind of over for next fall. And because it kind of honestly is. Like if you're just studying for the LSAT now and you don't have your score in hand, you're in a fucked, like rough spot. And a lot of this also has to do with my end goal, which is that on the Venn diagram of, actually, let me pull up a whiteboard for those of you watching on video. There's a, can I do a whiteboard? Let's see if I haven't done a whiteboard since the Logic Games days. And even then okay, I don't know how to do a whiteboard anymore. Anyway, the point is that there's a spectrum of offers, and those offers are how good the school is and also how much you pay. And so just getting into law school, a lot of people view that as a very binary, yes, it's good or no, it's good. Whereas I would put that on this matrix of how much are you paying and how good are the job outcomes out of that school. And if you fall in certain quadrants, like say if you're paying zero, maybe the job outcomes aren't that good, that's okay because your cost is really low. Or alternatively, maybe you're paying a lot, but you're going to Harvard, so it's worth paying. Now, I always view things in that framework. Not of is law school good, but is the school you're going to at the price you're going to? It doesn't make sense. And because I view it that way, I'll often look at people going to law school. I'm like, you got a raw deal. Like, for example, to go to Chapman at full price is crazy. To go to Colorado at full price is crazy. To go to basically any law school at full price is crazy. Outside of like the truly elite schools in the Harvards and the Yales. But that will be, I think, viewed as an attack on identity, which is Ben saying that my plan is bad. And honestly, because I am, but people, instead of viewing that as disconnected, which is I'm not attacking them as a person, I don't dislike people that do this. I think they are mistaken. I think they are making, like, they're kind of screwing themselves over. But fundamentally, they're the one that's going to suffer. And I say this because I genuinely want to save people. And I know I have saved people. I know I've talked people into approaching this process better. And I've gotten people to go to better schools where they don't go into debt or where they actually have the job opportunities that they're going to want. And so as much hate as I get, I'm just not going to stop. And I mean, if you want to look at this, like you can, I mean, my Instagram comments are somewhat regulated, but anyway, I mean, you can look at my Apple Podcast reviews. It's very bimodal. A lot of you rate fives, which I appreciate. And if you haven't, I would really appreciate that you do that to drown out the people rating 1 stars. But I do get 1 stars a decent amount. I also get angry emails from time to time. It is hard, I would say. But fortunately, because I'm so convicted on I'm not going to lie about this process, I'm just not going to stop. And for honestly, like from business sake, it probably would be better to stop. Like for me to just, and that's the route most LSAT prep takes. Most LSAT prep, most law school people, they will not talk about job outcomes. They will not talk about scholarship too aggressively. There's a few people that do, but it's definitely the minority. Well, sub 5% of the industry. Most people are just like, yeah, law school is great for everyone. We're going to help you do it. And I don't know. I can't do that. Like if it's good for you, it's good for you. But I just don't believe that's true for everyone. And so I guess this is a long way of saying that I have a really hard time with that. And although, which I guess it's kind of a good thing, because on the other hand, if I didn't have such a hard time with it, maybe I would take the path of less resistance and just tell people it's okay to do whatever they want to do, and not even think about it. Like I had a girl message me and she had a 148 2.7 and she was going to Cal Western. And I basically told her that's a really bad plan, and I told her like she's fucking herself over, and that does not sound nice. Like I'm not the good guy in her story. But I think I actually am because I'm the only one telling her what she needs to hear, which is that this is fucked. Like you're going to end your life. If not end your life, that's hyperbolic. But you're going to end your financial life if you do this. You are going to go to a school that is going to charge you $350,000 in tuition over the next, not in tuition, but in tuition and living costs. So in debt, whether or not it's paid to the your landlord or to the school is irrelevant. 70K per year is paid to the school. So it is like 200,000 plus interest. Anyway, I was like, and the job opportunities out of the schools suck. Like getting employed is a battle, let alone getting a high salary. So I'm like, I'm just not going to tell you that that's a good plan. That's an awful plan. And what she did was she had commented under a post that people will often call me discouraging. I mean, that's my favorite word. People say I'm discouraging. And the answer is yes. Yes, I am discouraging. If you're doing a stupid plan, I'm going to discourage you from doing your stupid plan. Is that a bad thing though? I think I'm the good guy for doing that. Would you rather? I say, yeah, sure, go to Cal Western, go $350,000 in debt to maybe make 60K. Is that nice to tell people that when their interest is 10% on their loans? They're going to be in debt forever and they can't declare bankruptcy because it's educational debt and you can't. Anyway, so all this is to say that I guess I kind of got sidetracked here, but the whole point is that I really believe what I say. And I get attacked a lot. And it's honestly hard sometimes, but fortunately, I have the shield if I care too much to stop. Because I do know that I genuinely help people. And I don't know, maybe for people that are fragile, that's not great. But anyway. So yeah, where was I? I was talking about why people get defensive when I say the LSAT's a reading test. Well, I think people, like we talked about, they hear it as devaluing their achievement. Further, low scores often react negatively too. I think part of it is wanting to believe the test is like conquerable through formulas. Like if I just learned these tricks, I can do it. Whereas I say, no, you actually have to read to understand, which is a path. It's actually a very clear path. If I tell you just read and understand, like fun fact, you guys can all do that. I guess the hard thing is you actually have to do it to score highly, which a lot of people just prefer that they could just learn the tricks, which there are no tricks. There are no indicator words. There is no answer choice strength. Like this is just not how you do the test. You do this test through comprehension. And people I think like to think that the difficulty on the LSAT comes from complexity. Not just the difficulty. Like I think it is difficult, but I don't think it's complex. The LSAT's a very simple task, which is what do they tell you and what can be deduced from it. On reading comp, every answer can be deduced from the passage. On logical reasoning, it is testing what conclusions can validly be deduced from the premises. On must be truths, it is deducing your own conclusions based on their premises. So it's actually a very simple task, which is just deduce things from premises that you understand. And that is a hard skill. Like it's a deep skill. Reading is not easy. They give you weird vocab. They're going to give you weird sentences. You're going to have to break it down and honestly learn some nasty things through error. However, it is not complex. So I think people often think that the logic task framing is easier. And also it's, for what's worth, encouraged by a lot of people. I just think it's wrong. So yeah, like we talked about, I think this came from logic games. It kind of laid the root for this. And then further, the tutoring industry turned that into a product. It's a lot easier to sell you don't know logic rules than you're misreading sentences. I mean, like, not to go back to our friend on Reddit who had posted that whole post on the cheat sheets. His whole final call to action at the end of his post, which I don't even dislike. Like I get what he's doing, and I don't like no shade to this guy. I don't think he's a bad dude. Said if you're feeling overwhelmed by this, reach out and I'll help you out. So it's ironically they're creating the problem to sell the solution. The problem is not it doesn't exist. These rules aren't hard. The way I framed it, I can't say reach out to me for help with these complex problems because I've already solved them in my initial post. On this Like, I can't tell you reach out to me for a consultation after this to help understand the logic because I've already explained the logic. It already makes sense. Now, what I can say is if you are studying, come get explanations with us because our explanations make sense and they will help you and you can get on-demand access to me to talk through LSAT questions. However, I can't say reach out for these really complex things because I don't believe in these complex things. I don't think they're real. And that actually, I think, sets us at a disadvantage compared to many of our competitors because we're just not going to say the LSAT so hard and we have the magic means because I don't believe there are magic means on the LSAT. Anyway, so that's tricky. And then over time, it just becomes self-reinforcing. People that learn this way teach it. And further, most LSAT instructors are just students. Like there are people that study, did decently well, and then start teaching it. There's not a lot of thought leaders in the space in terms of people that actually come up with their own takes. Like I think, not to like pat myself on the back too much, but I take my own takes. I put my neck out there. I make predictions. I make claims about what's going to happen based on my argumentation. I will try to defend it. And, for example, if you want to scroll back a couple of weeks ago, I've been talking about how much the ABA loans are really going to shake up the system. Ain't nobody else talking about that. It actually blows my mind how few people are talking about that. But like, I'm willing to make claims. And most people that are tutoring or teaching just aren't. They're just people that learned from some company and are regurgitating what they learned from some curriculum back through tutoring. And there's nothing wrong with that because generally speaking, the pricing, it reflects that. Like, when you pay a cheap tutor, that's what you're getting is some kid who got into law school and is trying to make bucks on the side until he goes to law school. The actual LSAT professionals, we are a small class. And then further, most of us are a lot of people have chosen the road of less resistance, which is not rocking the boat, just kind of meeting the market where they're at and selling them what they want. I don't believe in selling people what they want. I believe in selling people what they actually should want, which is tricky because that does make making a product a little bit harder. The good news is that you can kind of twist the things and make them match a little bit, which is I do ultimately believe that most LSAT preppers do want a higher score. And so I figure, okay, how do we get them that? And sure, some percentage of people won't do it because I'm going to tell them you actually have to understand, and that will just set them off because they want to learn logic tricks. But there are enough people that actually just want to get a high score that they are willing to work with us. So anyway, and it is funny. There is a lot of LSAT prep that like genuinely, or not prep, but people, preppers, as in individuals prepping for the test, who actually don't seem to want to understand the LSAT better. They want to seem like they're doing something and working on it. But in reality, they're not really making progress. They're kind of just treading water, learning this logical nonsense. Anyway, so it becomes self-reinforcing. Now I personally actually had a weird introduction to all this way of doing the test because I self-studied for the LSAT. I read the Power Score books. That was my only exposure to the test, which for what's worth are not the worst. They are overly dogmatic, but Power Scores, self-prep, the textbooks, I would actually argue are some of the better textbooks on the market. Now I don't think that you should pay for their like online programs personally. And for what's worth, do what you want to do. If you want, I mean, what I would say is like if you're comparing me versus anyone, for one, I really believe that we do a better way LSAT, but then further, just look at what people put out for free and evaluate based on that. What I think you'll find is that we're stronger. Anyway, but the whole point is that their textbooks actually are on the stronger side of textbooks, I would say. And I didn't get to their logical reasoning textbook. I did their logic games one, which was fantastic. It said there's only one way to diagram things, which I disagreed with. And further, diagramming logic games, like we talked about, is a different monster than diagramming logical reasoning. But it was largely good. The Reading Comp Bible had some nonsense in it, but it also had some good stuff. I got a lot of exposure, and that was useful. I better understood the test. Now, I did abandon most of their strategy, but the actual exposure was pretty decent. And anyway, I had not run into this whole idea of diagramming arguments. So then when I encountered it, it made no sense to me. I was like, I'm already scoring high. I'm getting everything right. And people keep telling me these vocab words or that this test is harder than it is. I'm like, I don't know what that is. I don't know what nested conditionals are. If that's even real, which I'll grant that it is. But the whole point is, do you need to understand this to be good at the test? And the answer is, of course you don't. That's silly. So my belief is that LSAT culture has invented a fake technical language for something that's fundamentally straightforward. Anyway, what else do we have? So just to go back to like what the intuitive way actually looks like, it is reading every line as an assertion by a person, not a puzzle, asking what are they saying? What evidence do they have for that? Do you agree? What holes are there? Is there any issue with it? Have they left things out of their argument? And you want to stay in English. Like if you can't explain it to your mom or to your little brother, you don't understand it. And translating it might give this illusion of mastery, but it's not mastery. It's an illusion. I don't use diagrams hardly ever. The LSAT's just not that hard. You don't have to. And the goal really should just be understanding, because if you understand it, you're going to get the answers right. So ultimately, the LSAT is a reading test that has been taught as a logic test. Our hope is that in time, we bring it back to a reading test. I truly believe that in 10 to 15 years, we will have, if the LSAT's still around, but I truly believe that we will affect this test's dialogue. Long term, the logic way of doing this test just won't survive because it's not as good. And when I think about LSAT, because for those of you that don't know, like I'm in this for my career, I really enjoy this test. I have fun with it. I love building HeyFutureLawyer.com. Like we are going to keep building it and making it better and better month over month. If you're one of our LSAT competitors listening, you should be scared shitless. And because like we've only been around for a year and we're working hard. I mean, I've been teaching LSAT for way longer, but the amount of progress we've made in a year is more than anyone has ever done before. And that's not to say that, we don't have a lot to do, because we have a lot to do. We have a lot of work to do every day. We meet and talk about what we're doing next to make our site better and how to make LSAT prep better. I'm recording explanations literally every day. And it's exciting because I know that we can be the best prep on the internet, and it's not even going to be close. Anyway, my point is that you guys are going to lose because your way of doing this test isn't good. And long-term, quality is what wins. And sure, we have no one really knows who we are. If you're listening, you're one of the few. Go comment, Hey Future Lawyer on Reddit. Most people have no clue who you're talking about. That's okay. We're honestly not pushing our marketing because we're really working on our product. Like we do a little bit of marketing on the podcast, Instagram, etc. But fundamentally, most of our energy is going back into the site, both with our developer and with me. It's really like I do a lot of question explanation filming. I do a lot of responding to our customers, our users, I guess is a better way to put it. I do a lot of just talking with people about like questions that make sense. And our developers spend most of the time making the site better. The marketing push just isn't there because we want to make the site as good as possible, because that's our North Star, is if we can make this as good as possible, we can help people. And through that, we will win because we are better. And if you're listening, we're better. And that this way is better. And fundamentally, you can always have the market of people that will want to pretend this test is harder than it is. But you're welcome to have them. I want the people that actually want to get high LSAT scores. And I think when push comes to shove, most people do actually want a higher LSAT score. Some people might give themselves the security blanket if this test is harder than it is. But long term, that's not what this is about. Most people do actually care about their outcomes. They care about what law am I going to go to, at what price am I going to go to. And fundamentally, we beat you on those grounds. So you can keep doing what you're doing, but I'd be scared if I were you. And anyway, so I'll wrap with that. I did have a lot more to get through, but we're just not going to go into it. We'll hit that now next time because this just went long. So anyway, if you ever want to talk or like see what's going on with us, shoot me an email. Further, I do actually need personal statements. I want to do more personal statements on the show. That's been mentioned. A lot of you have been sending an email saying how much you love that, but I don't have any in the queue. So if you want your personal statement like live roasted on the show, send it in. Maybe I'll send an email out to my email list to get a bunch submitted. But if you want it, I'll do it. I will note that I'll only do it if it's free to go on the air because I don't do edits for free. But if you want yours blasted and sent in, I will edit it live on the show for everyone else to hear, and I will redact it so that it's relatively anonymous. Anyway, hope you all are having a good fall. It's a strong time to finish strong. It is the end of the year, 2025. We're in Q4, but finish strong. Don't wait for your goals. Make sure that every day you're taking a step towards whatever your goal is going to be, and I will see you all next week. If you enjoyed what we talked about today or learned something new, please leave a review or a rating. It really does help us out and helps us reach more people. If you have a question or anything you want talked about in the world of LSAT or law school admissions, you can always email support@heyfuturelawyer.com to get it in the podcast agenda. Just put podcast in the subject and we will talk about it on the show. Alrighty, that's all we have for today. So I will see you all next time.